It is time for the final episode of the How Good Is Your Overwatch League team series. Today the spotlight is going to be on the Houston Outlaws, who once again are sadly not being talked about all that much. And if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I think the lack of recognition is warranted. Their current outlook does not look promising. I'm going to try and spread some optimism where I can, but it's important that I be brutally honest up front because I really don't want to give any Houston fans a false sense of security. So 2020 was another rough year for the Outlaws, but to be honest, this was arguably their worst year yet. The best thing the Outlaws did this year was beat the Mayhem essentially. I can't really think of any other noticeable achievements. With a poor performance on their minds, it was clear that some big time changes were in order. Houston were looking to make some major changes, hence why 7 players were not brought back. The most obvious ones were definitely Boink and Muma. I know. How could they do the GOAT Boink so dirty? Crazy, right? But in all seriousness, we all knew this was going to happen. He didn't see the stage a single time in 2020. They had zero use for the guy. As for Muma, the way he played was simply unacceptable. He literally got benched for a DPS player at main tank. That speaks volumes about how much he was struggling, so it was better to just move on. Another departure that was probably expected was Lynxer. As much as I love and respect him, his career had been on a downward spiral for a long time. It's those inconsistencies, man. They constantly pester him. One day he's keeping up with S-tier hit-scan players in the league, the next you almost forget he's in the lobby. What's sad is that he has more lows than highs these days. I know he was a fan favorite, but it was worth it to move to a different option. Now for some of the moves that are a bit more up in the air on whether they were the right choice or not. How about we start with Blase? It feels so weird to me that Houston did not bring him back. I'm not sure if this was a choice they made or if Blase wanted to go somewhere else. Either way, it feels like a waste almost that Houston even bothered to trade for him last year. I mean, half of the time they weren't even utilizing him correctly in 2020. He also didn't get nearly as much time on stage as some of his DPS counterparts. Despite him meshing very well with his teammates personality-wise and just being friends with them, he ended up not being a good scheme fit, I guess, at least according to Houston, I suppose. I'm kind of disappointed that things had to turn out this way, because Blase definitely does have untapped potential still. It's not the biggest loss in the world, but I feel he's somebody who could have helped this team in their future endeavors. Next up, the longtime duo of Jexe and Repel would be on the chopping block. Given that these two were Houston's more consistent players, I would say this is a little disappointing. Neither of these players were amazing, but still relatively decent at their respective positions, which is definitely a step up compared to their support duo in 2019. I find it so funny that these two are going to be part of the enemy roster now. I guess we'll see soon enough if the Outlaws end up regretting this. And last, but certainly not least, the Outlaws parted ways with Meko. This one is understandable. It's clear that Meko was a shell of his former self. That once dominant and consistent player from the NYXL was nowhere to be seen. He definitely did play better around the halfway mark of the year, but he still wasn't playing anywhere near his maximum potential. Meko isn't the most flexible off-tank out there either. He's good at D.Va and Sigma, but he's lacking in some of the other departments. But at the same time, he was still arguably one of Houston's better players. If it wasn't Dante or Jexe making the play, it was usually him. He found a decent stride once Hydration took over the main tank duties. It's unfortunate. Now Houston are back to square one with their off-tank situation, which has been a huge thorn in their sides for years now. But players were not the only aspect of this team to change, because coaching was another clear-cut problem this team dealt with. So assistant coaches Dream and Hureg ended up saying their goodbyes. The coaching made terrible mistakes with some of their decision-making at times last year. This especially goes for the team's early season struggles. They were just as much of a problem as some of their lackluster players. Good on the Outlaws for being quick to change. So that does it for the departures. A lot of these were very necessary, so they were pretty productive on that end, I would say. Now shifting gears to the acquisitions, they started by signing Crimzo. Crimzo is just an okay pickup. It's a situation where you know they could have done better, but also a lot worse. It's a very take it or leave it scenario. Crimzo is either average or I guess ever so slightly above average depending on who you're talking to. Either way, he does not do a fantastic job of making the Houston support situation a lot better than it used to be. Given how he performed compared to Repel, I would call this a side grade or maybe a slight upgrade at best. I like Crimzo as a person, and I do believe he's going to fit in with Houston's team culture very well, but it's uncertain how impactful he's truly going to be. He's a very well-rounded player who is a reliable healer. If he can play the way he did on Dallas last year, that would be great. He might even be able to play a little bit better depending on how he fits in, but I think it's more likely that he plays a little bit worse because in my eyes, that Dallas team from last year is a bit better compared to this current roster on Houston. Crimzo's a question mark, but also nowhere near the biggest concern. While we're on the topic of supports, let's talk Juby. This one was rather unexpected. I don't believe he was ever extremely well known in terms of Western main supports, just pretty alright from what I've heard. But the thing is, he's supposedly killing it, like he was really good during tryouts apparently. Now of course, playing actual games is going to be a bit different, it'll be a way bigger challenge, but that's the type of stuff you like to hear if you're an Outlaws fan looking for any sort of good news you can. The one thing I can say with certainty that I love about this pickup is that Juby is the first collegiate player to make it to the big leagues. Now, full disclosure, he also played for some big name NA contenders teams in the past, like Second Wind, but the last team he played for was Harrisburg University. As a college student who also follows traditional sports, this is the type of stuff that really hits home for me. But the question is, will he be any good? My answer? I have no idea. I would keep my expectations minimal. He's somebody who can play the main support heroes plus Baptiste somewhat effectively, but I have no clue how amazing he'll be compared to the league average. I don't even know if he'll be better than Jexe was. Next up, the Outlaws bolstered their DPS line with Happy, KSF, and surprisingly Jake. The big signing of these three has to be Happy, of course, because this is genuinely a perfectly fine pickup. He's a noticeable upgrade compared to Lynxer, no doubt about it. He's got a way higher skill cap and better overall sniping skills. And while he too has inconsistency problems, they are nowhere near what Lynxers are. They essentially get a 2-for-1 out of this, a better player and a more consistent one. I am expecting him to be a big help for Dante, who constantly had to do all the heavy lifting in the past. And with Happy already having experience on an English-speaking roster, we don't have to be super concerned over his communication. Overall, it's a fairly nice pickup which gives them some firepower that was very much needed. It's a bit harder with KSF though as we move on to him. As a former Valiant fan, I'm always going to vouch for him. He's a relatively decent flex DPS with a pretty deep hero pool. The problem is that Dante and Happy are just better with a lot of the same things he plays, and even Hydration to a certain extent if we're talking projectile heroes. KSF feels to me more like a situational player. I suppose that being a threat on Hanzo and Widow makes him viable in double sniper metas for sure, but outside of that, I have no idea what he's going to play. He wasn't necessarily a bad pickup who won't ever play, it's just going to depend. Then there's Jake, who was probably the weirdest pickup of all. I never would have expected him to come out of retirement so quickly, but here he is, I guess. His role on this team as a player feels pretty minimal to me. Unless Houston finds that he works better than his DPS counterparts for whatever the reason, you'd expect to see him on the bench this year primarily. But the thing is, Jake didn't really come to this team to get a lot of playtime. He came to fill out more of a player coach role. Could that be a good thing that really helps the Outlaws? Maybe. I could see Jake being pretty good at this type of thing. He's friendly, hardworking, motivated, and pleasant to be around. The fact that he's a former player who already has a relationship with some of these guys could make the situation even better. Depending on how he does, Jake could receive a promotion of some sort in the future, or at the very least draw attention from a different team by the time we get into Season 5. I'm curious to see if this next part of his career can take off. That's all I really have to say about Jake joining this team though, so now we finish off the player additions with probably the most controversial choices of their entire offseason. The new tank line representing the Houston Outlaws is going to be Junggu and Piggy out of Talon Esports. It's no secret that not a lot of people are high on these two. As former members of a respectable contenders team, they might have some potential, but given the criticisms and even the rumors, it's probably not all that high. I think the biggest problem I face with them is that they're not versatile enough. Both of them feel more like they're only meant for certain metas. They were both known for their Reinhardt-Zarya combo back in the day, as well as some Orisa stuff I think, but mostly the Reinhardt-Zarya. So overall, they're definitely lacking, and I don't know if a few months of time is going to be enough to help them adjust. I want to believe in them and give them a chance, but there's a lot of stuff stacking up against them right now. These two players are the biggest question marks of this roster. If this team wants to have a chance of at least being decent, these two have to come through. Otherwise, it could be another disaster of a season just waiting to happen. Now turning our attention over to the coaching, I was actually impressed to see them pick up former San Francisco Shock assistant coach Junkbuck as a new co-head coach alongside Harsha. What's cool is that these two have actually worked together in the past, I believe, back in Season 1, as well as in the 2019 World Cup, and that could end up working to Houston's advantage. Maybe the coaching will be a bit better now that these two plus Jake are working together. Like 9K and Arachne, Junkbuck is a disciple of Krusty. That alone might mean some improvement for the Houston Outlaws. To be on the Shock for as long as he did must mean that he brings some sort of value, you'd have to assume. There's reason to feel optimistic about him if you're an Outlaws fan. He might not necessarily show results right away this year, but much like the Shock in their first year, all it might take is some time before you see the improvement you're looking for. And with that said, that is actually everything the Outlaws did this offseason. Like I mentioned earlier, it really wasn't ideal. The Outlaws needed a lot more help, but they were unable to sign a lot of major playmakers. For what it's worth, I like what they did at DPS. I feel like it's a strong point of their team, and I definitely do like what they're doing with Jake, as well as the general direction they're taking with the coaching staff. But the thing is, nothing else outside of this has real promise in my eyes. Jungkook and Piggy, they're risky and not extremely desirable. Crimzo and Juby, they could be okay, but it likely won't be anything that makes you say, oh, they're definitely going to compete with the solid support lines in North America. So overall, I would just say, very mediocre offseason. In all honesty, besides the coaching and DPS, they kind of just made a bunch of downgrades or side grades. So I'm going to give the Outlaws a D+ as their offseason grade. It's tough. I want the Outlaws to do well consistently. It's something they've never been able to sustain in their entire existence. But the rosters they keep assembling are not making it easy. The only aspect of this team I'm somewhat confident in, as I've been saying, is the DPS. And even they aren't that amazing because there's a lot of stacked DPS lineups in North America. There's so many starters who look to be average or below average on paper. If you want to show results in this league, most of your positions have to be in somewhat good shape, I would say. If you have a weak point or maybe two, it might not be the end of the world. We've seen teams get away with it before, but when you have this many potential exploitable weaknesses, you can't help but feel concerned. Like, I don't know if there's a single tank line in North America that is genuinely a lot less appealing on paper than Jungkook and Piggy, maybe besides like Shredlock and FRD, because they have the superior synergy, I guess. I'm sure I'm not the only person who feels this way either, and I share similar concerns over the support line. I could see them being better than like Vancouver, maybe London, Atlanta, and Paris, but that's about it. Again, the DPS feel like the one aspect of this team that could pull their weight on a somewhat consistent basis. Even the coaching isn't guaranteed to succeed. I like Junkbuck, but he's never been a head coach at this level before, and he's sharing the spotlight with Harsha, who did not do a great job last year. And as much as I hate to say it, there's not a lot of guarantees with Jake either. All the Outlaws have done is make me ask more questions. My lack of optimism makes me believe the Outlaws finish anywhere from 18th through 16th place in the overall standings. In all honesty, it would be a miracle if this team does any better than bottom 5. I can confidently say that they won't finish in last, but that's about the only guarantee I can give to my Outlaws fans out there. To be brutally honest, I think the synergy might be lacking in some departments. It feels so weird to have so many Western players, but then throw in Jungkook and Piggy who have no experience with English-speaking rosters. I get the feeling that this could hurt them when considering that even the other bottom-of-the-barrel teams in the league are going to have better overall synergy. They feel to me like they're going to get eaten alive by most of their competition. Vancouver, Paris, and London are the only teams I can say with confidence they have a decent chance of beating on a weekly basis. There might be a few occasions where this team also pulls off an upset victory because of their DPS alone. Dante, Happy, KSF, and Hydration might be able to do enough to carry their team to relevance every once in a while. Perhaps Crimzo and Juby can piece together some solid performances here and there as well. If Crimzo could do it on that inconsistent and mentally boomed Dallas team, maybe there's still hope for him to do it on Houston as well. If Jungkook or Piggy are going to pull their weight, I fully expect it to be meta dependent. It might even come down to a certain hero pool. If Ryan Zarya is the play, maybe they can hold their own. But even then, it still might not be enough. I'm sorry, Outlaws fans. I know you're tired of doing this, but you should once again keep your expectations low. I know it's exhausting to likely go through the same thing yet again, but I'd rather be honest with you instead of giving you some sort of false hope. I don't want you to feel any more disappointed. Stay strong, Houston fans. Seriously, hang in there. Maybe one day your team is finally going to dig themselves out of this hole and give you the team you all deserve. And on that note, we are done with the final episode of the Overwatch League team preview and off-season recap series for 2021. I can't believe we got through all of that so quickly, and I did want to thank all of you so much for your continuous support on the series. It was absolutely amazing, and I really do hope I could help build upon the hype for the season at least a little bit for all of you. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future content. Oh, and don't forget to tell me how you feel about the Outlaws down in the comments. And until next time, this is ATP, signing out. Peace.